EY actually did a report into the state of the fintech market in Australia in 2018, and in that report it actually stated that 81% of all fintechs in Australia had all male founders. So why do you think, fintechs in particular, and also the startup scene more broadly, is so heavily male dominated, and what do we need to do to encourage more women to become entrepreneurs?
So I'm a contributor to Forbes, and I wrote an article about this, and some of the original programmers were women.
Yes.
And in the 70s, Steve Jobs and some of his cohort started really targeting men and creating this whole persona around male geeks as the kind of coders. And I think women started to see themselves less so as belonging in that field. And I think there are lots of programs now around coding for girls and getting them involved in tech, and having some female role models helps for them to be able to see, there is a place for me in this sector. And so it's really about recultivating a presence, because I think that men and women have a lot to offer this space, and they've got many common but many unique skill sets. So I think women are very good systems thinkers and men are great firefighters, and you need both to make a successful business and really to innovate. In Power Ledger, we've got about 50% women and men, but we don't yet have a female programmer, but we do have a female technical lead. And in spite of her not coding herself, she's very well respected by the programmers in our office. So I feel like there's enormous opportunity for women in the space, and that I hope that they can see that and pursue it as a career, because it is really exciting and fulfilling.
Yeah, so it's more around that cultural shift away from, if you're a tech nerd, you're probably a male. But,
correct.
Women can absolutely do it too. Yeah, that's interesting.
Awesome. I think that's a really valid point. And I think there's been some progress in the last sort of, 12 to 18 months where I've seen quite a lot more of a push to get more women involved in entrepreneurship, in STEM careers. And that's something that's really, I think, close to my heart, at least. I always try and encourage, my sister, who's never thought of herself as a maths person or a science person, to just give it a go. And I think that kind of connects to your Power Ledger approach of, let's give it a go and see if we can actually disrupt and we can change. So that's really, really meaningful. And I think that's definitely a highlight for me, is just give it a go. And that's such an Australian,
I was just going to say
Australian sort of mantra. And it seems to be across all generations, we all have, as Australians, we all have that kind of attitude, or at least that sentiment. But yes, what wonderful sentiment there. I wanted to also ask you, speaking of developing skills for the future, we had this panel event, and it was actually last night at Young Professionals, the Perth Young Professionals. It was about automation, and it was about AI, and what's the future look like for automation, AI in Perth particularly. And you mentioned, you guys have done some automation already in California at the higher end. And what's your view on the role of AI and automation in our future here in Perth?
Well, in the mining industry, you're already seeing that manifest very profoundly.
Yes.
In the automation of trucks and management of mine sites. And I think that will really be world-leading, and is world-leading, not just in the mining sector, but I think you'll start to see secondary and tertiary instances of that in other sectors. In the case of energy, there is the need for AI and automation, as you put it, in, for example, smart meters that measure how much electricity is produced. Money is transacted off the back of that, and carbon credits and more money is transacted off the back of that. And so as a source of truth, you need to make sure that it's not measuring the output more than is actually physically possible of an asset. And there's, that they haven't been tampered with, or there's just not any mistakes. So I think that as we move towards this automated world, you're going to need to find ways of validating that using AI as well, to get regulators comfortable with using that as an alternative methodology to perhaps a manual process. And I think you can see that reflected in, even voting or census that, tried to digitise things and have not gone so well, that, you're going to need to probably do these things incrementally with lower risk things to start off with, before it can be used for higher risk or higher value instances.
The voting one's an interesting one, considering we just had a federal election and I had to stand at my local primary school for half an hour lining up to vote. I thought, why can't we just do this online? But understandably, not everyone wants to vote online. But I just think, as a country, we could definitely be adopting this stuff more.
Yeah, it might be that we see it at, local governments first, where it's, less of a risky proposition and that it could be scaled up over time. But I think, there's enormous opportunity for that, because not everyone wants to stand in line to vote, even if there is a sausage sizzle there.
I know. The sausages weren't that good. And they were $3 a sausage. They're pricey anyway.
Pricey sausages, yeah. I think I had about a 45 to an hour wait. Yeah, it was one of the busier primary schools that day. I think that's very interesting in terms of how AI is actually being used in conjunction with automation, and they're not two separate things. Have you come across any myths or common misconceptions for AI and automation that perhaps you can debunk for our listeners? I know one of the things that we discussed last night, it was essentially that AI and automation is taking away people's jobs, and it was debunked at the time to talk about it's also creating jobs, but different jobs.
Yeah, I think it's changing the nature of work, and there will be many more opportunities and new sectors that will emerge as a result of that. So I think that there will be less of certain types of jobs and more of others. But I don't think that we're going to be entering this world where there'll be a lot of people jobless. But we do need to bear that in mind when we think about transitions and whether those certain jobs are offshored as a result of that. And I think it's incumbent upon governments to contemplate, how are they going to get a piece of the pie of the new sectors and the new economies, and make sure that they don't miss out on any of the action.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I'm not too familiar with state government in terms of their structure, but how has Power Ledger and the state government worked together, or is there a renewable energy body or something that you liaise with and you work with?
Well, there are the regulator, and there's also state regulators and federal regulators around energy and carbon, and we do liaise with them on various projects and try to understand the regulations. And for example, if you do want to trade electricity within strata developments, you need an exemption from the Utilities Office. So that involves them looking at these new types of ways of generating energy on site and getting comfortable around it. And I think that starts to obviously inform their views of what new rules might look like over time. Equally, like in Thailand, we're talking along with our partner there with the regulators, and it's really heartening to see their appetite and interest to innovate.
Touching on Dan's point earlier, in terms of geography, do you find some places and some governments are more open to these new ways of generating energy and things like that? Or
well, I think it's kind of accepted that we're getting new types of energy in the system, but it's really the sort of next phase is about how do we integrate that into the physical system to keep it stable, but then also how do you get the transactive and commercial layer right so you get the right physical outcome. What I mean by that is, like in South Australia, there's so much solar now that we're creating physical problems in the market. So the government's got a program to roll out 40,000 batteries that's going to store that solar during the day and take it offline. But if you can get that will take a lot of people off grid. But if you can get the economic incentive right, where they can actually trade that energy into the market, into the peak, they'll increase the size of their batteries and stay connected to the grid because they'll pay the battery off faster. And then you don't, disconnect a whole lot of users from the network and create this other perverse outcome of, the utility death spiral, as it's kind of colloquially called. So I think that it's not just around, swapping out solar and batteries or with, coal and gas-fired power stations. You need to think about the economic and commercial layer on top of it. Otherwise, you'll end up with a perverse physical outcome as well. So I think the commercial and transactive layer can drive the right physical outcome.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of press around the energy issues that South Australia has had, but no doubt when you're the first one through the door, often, you do have to go through a fair bit of pain. Do you think WA should be a bit more progressive from a renewable energy perspective, a bit like South Australia has been?
Well, South Australia's got a particular problem in their market right now that I think batteries and the right size batteries can solve. But I think that there's benefit in looking at community scale batteries, to go back to our earlier conversation, as opposed to individual household batteries, because you get economies of scale and it's better managed. And then it can be sitting perhaps in the grid and households own, virtually speaking, a section of the battery, but then it can provide services to the grid. So it can have greater utility to the market and it can drive more income for the battery and the battery owners as well. In terms of the West Australian network, we've got different problems here, but there's certainly opportunity for batteries to help solve those, and in constrained bits of the network, rather than the government owning those assets, it could be owned by investors. And I think in remote communities that are connected by skinny bits of poles and wires, rather than maintaining those at enormous cost, you could look at standalone power stations and power systems that might be community owned. So I think they're big opportunities that you can see in Western Australia that are perhaps unique but involve those same technologies.
Listening to one of your previous interviews in terms of the virtual power station, and you just touched on that. So maybe you can expand that a little bit.
Yeah. So the idea is that households have solar and batteries, and it's not just about them avoiding consumption in the peak. The size of their system is such that they could sell their energy company their battery-sourced electricity and pay back the battery very fast. And we call that our virtual power plant platform. And why I think it's exciting is a few reasons. One is energy retailers have to buy electricity in the peak if they haven't got enough of their own generation assets, and the prices can be very high. So the maximum price on the national electricity market in Australia on the East Coast is $14,500 a megawatt hour, which is $14.50 a kilowatt hour. And to put that into context, electricity is normally around 20 cents a kilowatt hour, thereabouts. So it's significant multiples. And if you have a battery that's 10 kilowatt hours in your house, that is like $145 worth of electricity. Say the energy company pays the household half of that, so $77. If you think about that, there might be 10 instances like that in a year, it could pay itself off pretty quickly. And encourage the household to stay connected to the grid and stay with that particular energy company and reduce the hedge costs, the price and risk for the energy company as well. And the difference between the Power Ledger system doing that and other virtual power plants is that we use the blockchain to measure what's happening in a near real-time fashion and pay the household that same day or the following day. Yes. And they don't have to wait a couple of months, because other VPP projects or demand response give them, like, say, a fixed amount of money 2 months later, in retrospect, regardless of how much the household dispatches. So they're a bit divorced from, if I change my behaviour, I can make more money. Whereas using our platform, it's about a real-time agile experience that encourages the right physical outcome and rewards the household for doing that. And the other thing, and why the blockchain as well, is if you have two retailers in the same market, you can actually allow trading between them off-market and report into the wholesale market. And you could set to do off-market trading and settlement and report into the wholesale market. And you can do that in near real time using the blockchain as well, which you couldn't do with a regular database. And I think that although peer-to-peer trading is the signature product that we're most well known for. That is just like the first step in the manifestation of effectively a 24-hour electricity system powered by the blockchain. And I think that we'll be launching our virtual power plant product very soon on the east coast of Australia, and I'm very excited.
It really shows how inefficient the energy market that we have at the moment is and how much waste there is in the system. It's about time someone did something about it.
Well, it's a complicated thing, blockchain and energy markets, and we try and explain it in a simple way, and we're kind of so that people can understand it, because if they're confused, then it's hard to trust new things. Yeah. But I feel like we're starting to make headway in the conversations that we're having with potential clients, and I think 2019 will be a very different sort of stage for Power Ledger's life than last year and the year prior.
So now we've got Scott Morrison for another 3 years.
Yes.
Is he going to pick up the phone and call you and ask you what he's going to do with regards to energy policy?
Well, I think you might have to pose that question to him. I've not had the fortune to speak with him or meet him yet. Yeah. But I think that he definitely wants to drive cost out of the electricity market. And I think that our technology, can help deliver the sophistication that's needed in the market to deliver low cost and low carbon energy. Yeah. And they're not mutually exclusive.
Some of the common themes that I've picked up over the last 45 minutes of our conversation have a go. Efficiency, sustainability, as well as, I think an interesting one is fairness. It seems like transparency and fairness is central to your business. Can you talk a bit about Power Ledger's values and the core kind of, what do you think is essential or is quintessentially Power Ledger's values?
Well, I think that the people that work at Power Ledger are, a collection of technology and energy experts that are really passionate about working in this space and the democratisation of power and, reimagining our energy future. And I think that we do have a can-do attitude, and we want to try and tackle problems that perhaps people have gone too hard or can't be solved even. So the context around making a positive contribution to climate change, I think, is very empowering. Somebody told me the story once about it's two guys in a field, both of them are chipping away at rocks, and one looks really downtrodden, and somebody says to him, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm chopping up rocks." And the other guy's doing exactly the same thing, but looking completely elated. And somebody says, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm building a cathedral." And the same activities, but without a context behind them, I think changes the whole experience. And I'd say that is what it's like for the founders and people that work at Power Ledger, that they are motivated by something that has a context behind it.
Very mission driven, and that's so important in terms of high performing teams and delivering something of high value. That's really important, and certainly I think that's something that I encourage all our listeners to do, is to find something that if they spend their 9 to 5 that they really believe in, that they feel that they're contributing to something that's central to them as well, and something that they really believe in. So appreciate that. Speaking of our listeners and some of the skills that they're trying to develop over the next, say, 12 to 18 months, and being such an innovative company focused on blockchain, what do you think are important skills that perhaps our listeners should try and foster over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, I spent 11 years working in banking and most of my 20s in an office, buried in spreadsheets and doing financial models. And I just find that I didn't love it at the time, but understanding how these things work is so important. Understanding commerce, how it works, and understanding how contracts are formed, how intellectual property is licensed and sold, what that does to the value of a company, understanding corporate documents. These are very important basic skills that if you're going to work in the private sector, you're going to be differentiated by having these skills, whether you become an entrepreneur or you work for somebody. So I'd say that your parents probably just say work hard and be good to your employer. But I think that the more you can suck in in your 20s, the more effective you're going to be at something that you might venture and do by yourself later in life. And that there's so many tools and resources available online to learn, whether it be coding or financial modelling. And I would really encourage people, if you're going to spend lots of time on your phone, to listen to podcasts or try and absorb new things. It's not just finished university, done. The marketplace now is so competitive, and that those that have unique skills in emerging fields are going to have demand for their services.
Just to wrap up, I know we've just got a few minutes left, but really one question that I ask all my guests is, looking back on, say, the last 5 to 10 years, what advice would you give a younger self, a younger Jemma?
Keep learning every day. Like, try and teach yourself something or meet new people. Networking is so important. I always thought it was important, but now I really think it's even more important than ever before, especially if you want to operate in an international market and you're based in one place. You need to build networks outside of that, and try and question what people say is fact, and not in a suspicious way, but just query that, because I think there's lots of people and naysayers out there that would try and tell you that's how it is, and it is how it is until someone makes it another way, and that's really up to you if you want to do that.
Wonderful.
That's good advice.
Yeah, agreed. I'll draw it to an end there, Jemma, and I really do appreciate your time and your insight, and the work that Power Ledger is doing is just fascinating. So, in 6 to 12 months, I want to come back and see how you guys have grown and interview and bring back something from our listeners, what they've got from this as well. So again, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to the PerthYP podcast. You can find more episodes on our YouTube and LinkedIn pages at PerthYP. Until next time, keep listening, keep growing, and keep connecting.